Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of UNESCO Talks. I'm your host, Gabby Menezes. UNESCO's own Carlos Vargas is in the studio with us today. He's a global expert in teachers and education policy, and he's here to chat about the challenges facing teachers today and how AI has potential in our classrooms. Carlos, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks to you, Gabby.
So the first question is really, why are teachers so central to education?
Well, first of all, I would say that teachers are central to education and to the future of societies as a whole. When one thinks about the multiple purposes of education, we see that teachers play a role beyond the qualification of students, the transmission of culture, of the transmission of knowledge, and they actually work in the socialization of individuals. So the formation of identities, the formation of a sense of responsibility for learners of themselves, of others, and of the planet. So these kind of skills that teachers need to have, and this role that they play in the socialization, the subjectification, the formation of identities is vital in our world today.
So really, despite all of the advances of digitalization in the classroom, there's still this human factor that no machine can really give students, right? It's this sort of empathy, growth, guidance that really are still so central to developing students.
That's correct. I mean, the relational dimension of education, we at UNESCO see education as relational, non-transactional, has an important, requires of the role of teachers, basically learning in collaboration, learning with others, face-to-face. The teacher and learner relationship is fundamental to exercise these kind of competencies, whether it is critical thinking, whether it is problem solving, ethical judgment and deliberation. These are things that happen in practice and in relationship, in interaction with others. So therefore the role of teachers face-to-face, in person, in a relational engagement is fundamental.
I mean, we as humans can't get away from the fact that we're social animals, I guess, and so that just comes out in our teaching systems. But tell me, what are the challenges that teachers face today?
There are many, and I would say they relate mostly to the working conditions of teachers. And I would like to underline that the working conditions of teachers are the learning conditions of students. We usually forget how the conditions in which teacher works determines the quality of education. And when it comes to the working conditions, I would mention two dimensions. One of them has to do with the material working conditions, issues around remuneration, resources, infrastructure that teachers have at their disposal. For example, our global report on teachers, which we launched last year, showed in terms of remuneration that 50% of the world pay teachers less than any other professional with the same qualification. And that speaks of the second dimension that I wanted to bring forth. Beyond the material, we also have a symbolic condition when it comes to teaching. And that relates to the appreciation that teachers have socially, that speaks to the trust, the confidence that we have in the work that teachers do, and consequently, what are some of the agency, autonomy, decision-making power that we confer to teachers. So I would say the issue of working conditions, there's been an erosion in terms of the status of the profession. We used to think of teachers, and throughout culture and civilizations, we've seen the role of teachers as guides, as mentors, as community leaders, as public intellectuals. And today, this role has been eroded, and partly the issue of the emergence of digital technologies, the internet, the belief that knowledge is readily available for everybody to build, I think creates a confusion as to the redundancy, possibly, of the teaching profession. So we've seen different signs of this erosion of the teaching profession, including in violence against teachers, the lack of respect, as we said before, the lack of trust and therefore the lack of autonomy that teachers are conferred. So that is demotivating, and it leads teachers ultimately to leave the classroom, to leave the profession, to change jobs. In the global report that I was just citing, we revealed that the world lacks 44 million teachers just to ensure universal primary and secondary education. And that lack of teachers is the result of teacher attrition because of working conditions.
So it's actually teachers who were in the classroom who experienced difficulties in the classroom and then left the profession.
That's correct. 58% of that shortage is due to attrition.
So tell us, how can we support teachers and how can we encourage them back to the classrooms?
Well, there's many ways of doing that, and that's something that the report highlights. On the one hand, we need to dignify the profession, which means bring in better working conditions, better remuneration, so that teachers don't leave because of financial concerns. But at the same time, we have seen places with very good working conditions in terms of, the remuneration, the materials, the resources, but where teachers also leave the profession. And that speaks, as we said before, on the issue of autonomy, of providing educators room for decision making. We've seen very often a lot of education policies and reforms fail because they don't take into consideration the expert practical knowledge of teachers in the classroom who know better what works and what doesn't. And this knowledge is, wasted because it is not taken into consideration when we make education policies. So the issue of teacher voice, I think, is very important. Counting with teachers to make decisions, consulting with teachers, bringing teachers also into other pockets of education. A teacher can be a fabulous mentor in the classroom, but also can support curriculum development, instructional design, work with assessment, school leadership. There are so many activities that a teacher can do that can reinvigorate practice, that can motivate them as they come and go from the classroom to other positions and back to the classroom. So in that virtuous circle, I would say lies the answer to the dignification of the teaching profession.
And UNESCO works with a lot of countries on a policy level, recommends best practice. What are we recommending to policymakers?
Well, basically we're recommending that the status of teachers is elevated. We have two normative instruments at UNESCO, two recommendations around the status of teachers and higher education teaching personnel. They lay out the foundations, the rights, the responsibilities that teachers have and that education systems have upon teachers. So the recommendations can be very punctual, and it can go to the transformation of the working conditions of teachers, also recasting teaching as a collaborative profession, as our Futures of Education report suggested, is very important. The fact that teachers feel that they are a profession, that are brought together by a body of knowledge, but also by peers that share a codes of conduct, a codes of ethics, a code of service, that are dedicated to lead on their profession. So I would say that this issue of bringing, on the one hand, collaboration and lifelong learning, and life-wide learning, I would say, into teacher professional development, putting them at the center of their own career development, but also at the center of educational decisions, is something that governments can do and also societies can do. At the end of the day, the appreciation of teachers, the respect that we hold for them is within the hands of many, many different actors. And especially school leaders, like the principal of a school, can make a difference on an everyday basis to the satisfaction, to the motivation that teachers may have.
So what is something that you would suggest to a school principal that he do concretely to encourage the teachers that work under him?
I would say consultation and collaboration are key. So basically distributed leadership is something that is important, distributing that possibility of making decisions, consulting teachers as to what decisions to make, depending on, whether it is managerial or content or curriculum decisions that can be made in the school. in a way forming a community. Again, going back to the issue of trust and of confidence, that teachers hold the knowledge and the judgment to actually make recommendations that are feasible. Just one point in the report, it was a very good example that we have on school leadership. Because we usually say, I mean, we know the role that school leaders play in supporting the work of teachers, in managing the schools, in achieving the best learning outcomes, etc. But we often overlook the role that they play in making the lives of teachers much better. There's a study that UNESCO conducts every 4 years in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's called the ERCE. It's a comparative study of learning outcomes around 19 countries. And what it found out in the last edition is that the best performing schools were those that were led by school leaders that were collaborative, consulting with teachers, that had communities of practice running. So at the end of the day, one realizes that a good school leadership has a result, not only in terms of school climate and teacher well-being, but ultimately in better learning outcomes for students. So that is the kind of work that school leaders can do.
So the last question is really about AI, because I feel that it's impossible to really talk about teaching when we know that so much around it is changing because of the effects of AI. How do you see AI supporting teachers, and how are we seeing AI being used in the classroom?
Well, I would say that AI holds a lot of promise for improving the work that teachers do, but there are a couple of risks associated as well to the over-reliance on artificial intelligence. On the one side, I think that the use of artificial intelligence, for example, to alleviate the administrative workload of teachers is very good. I mean, different surveys show that teachers feel overwhelmed, but it's not so much for the time in front of students. It's not about classroom and teaching time, but it's actually the time that they spend in administrative chores. So I think artificial intelligence, that we're beginning to see, has that potential of lowering the workloads of teachers so that they can actually dedicate themselves to this relational, affective dimension of learning, which we know is very, very important. It also can be useful, for example, for planning lessons, designing programs, but I think there we run the risk of deprofessionalization. Basically, the fact that there's an over-reliance on artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, and that teachers begin to forget or fall out of use of the sense that it makes to plan a class, to mark homeworks, to track the progress of students, which is something that a machine can do, but the role of the teacher in adapting education to the very needs, to the very aspirations of learners is something that only teachers can do. So over-reliance and then, having this cognitive atrophy was something that was mentioned in our AI competency framework for teachers, can really lead to that. It can lead to teachers no longer knowing how to prepare a class, no longer knowing how to engage with learners, how to contextualize it, how to individualize learning, so that education actually does become relevant to the lives of students, that they resolve questions that they have, that they support vocations and aspirations that they have. So that very role, I would say, is one that is irreplaceable for teachers.
So indeed, the key message just seems to be that teachers are at the heart of the classroom and learning is centered around them.
That's correct. I would say teachers are irreplaceable, as we have seen, for the relational, for the affective dimension of learning. More now in the face of artificial intelligence and the digital turn, the competencies that teachers have, the contextualization, the care of learners, the individualization of education is in their hands.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us and sharing all of your thoughts about teachers and teaching. And thank you for joining us for another episode of UNESCO Talks. As always, please leave your comments and questions in the chat and we will get back to you.